Hey guys, Bud Elliot here, back again on Cover 3 with my summer school series. If you hear my voice, you can tell we're recording 7 episodes today. So, yeah, I'm having a couple flu game episodes. I'm going to talk Texas Tech today, and luckily, I got somebody else to do most of the talking. That's Jarret Johnson of Inside the Red Raiders, an awesome Texas Tech site. They have all the inside scoop on anything Texas Tech, and it's a really exciting time for Texas Tech. Top 35 power rated football team last year, finished 8-5, and had to be a pretty exciting year to cover these guys.
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me on the show. You always do a great job. I love your content, your shows. Yeah, it was an exciting year, and you know, halfway through, there were a lot of people looking at each other like, "Oh, I don't, this could be a bad ending." But they won their final three regular season games, and they beat Ole Miss convincingly in the Texas Bowl to really end the season on a high note and get a lot of momentum going into the offseason, and it's translated on the recruiting trail. Tyler Shutt coming back from injury, the second season in a row where he had a serious injury, him coming back and starting at quarterback, all four of those victories was huge. He took some big hits. He took some late hits that were called in the Texas Bowl against Ole Miss, but got up and ran for over 100 yards in that game, threw for a couple of scores, and was MVP. So he comes back, and that end of the season showed that this is a different Texas Tech team, because that's the opposite of what had happened to a lot of the previous Texas Tech teams in the last decade, where they would fold towards the end of the year. I think for a number of reasons. One was their schedule, one was their lack of depth, but they've started to build some real depth, which is what college football is all about, with all the attrition, late in the season. And this team, the core players have learned how to win when games they need to, and make the big plays when they need to win those games. So it was a lot. It was very exciting. Um, Again, in the middle of the season, there were some nerves about how is this going to go? Are they going to make a bowl game? And then, man, they really came on strong and showed a lot of grit and determination and finished out the season in terrific fashion.
They had a bit of a tricky schedule, to be sure, at times last year, and then they did play 3 quarterbacks. So Tyler, got hurt a decent bit. I know they liked Baron Morton too. Should we presume that Tyler is going to be the starter here in Lubbock?
Tyler Shuck is going to be the starter, but Baron Morton, I mean, especially in spring, he's put on good weight. Former Elite 11 quarterback or finalist quarterback. He was amazing to watch in high school through the recruiting process, and then he's been great in spring. He's done everything that's been expected of him in spring ball, in practice, and everything. And he looked really good against Oklahoma State in one of his starts last year when he was pressed into service as a redshirt freshman, due to injuries. Donovan Smith has gone on to Houston. So it is Shuck and Morton. Joey McGuire loves to promote, competitiveness, and wants people to competition, for every position. But Tyler Shuck's the guy. He's a great fit for what offensive coordinator Zach Kidley wants to do. He's actually faster, I think, than most people give him credit for, which he showed, like I said, in the Texas Bowl where he ran for over 100 yards. He has a great arm. He's already been through school. I believe he already got his master's as well. So he really has a lot of time to devote to football, almost like a pro, where he's at the facility all the time. So he really has this offense down. And, to me, it's a no-brainer that it's going to be Shuck. But that's not to take anything away from Baron Morton. I think, he's just a play away from playing. And they know that they could win a lot of games with Baron Morton. And I think there's a good shot he'll be the quarterback of the future after this season.
The offense carried the team last year. From who they return, it looks like they really like what they have. They basically their top 5 receivers return. They're running a pretty true-ish version of the air raid. I think 4 of the top 5 offensive linemen are back. They pick up, is it Rusty Stats from Western Kentucky? Rusty Stotts. That's a pretty cool name. Like that guy should play for the Rangers.
Right, right. That's a big pickup. Stats at center.
Are like Bradley and Price obviously are really really nice pieces they have. Xavier White's a solid football player as well, and a guy that's played a lot of football. Are there guys here in the receiving core who you think could break through and take some of those starting spots, or is it just that they're running them back? They like them. They didn't take very many guys or any guys in the portal. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, they really like the receiver room. There's a lot of size. You mentioned Bradley, 6'5", 6'6". That he really is a beast. I know that term's overused, but just standing next to him, I'm 6'4", and he's looking down at me like I'm his kid or something. I mean, he's huge. He can really run. He's coming into his own as a route runner. But in terms of guys who could step up, former four-star recruit Loic Fungi is someone who's battled injuries. When he's available, he produces. But if he could stay healthy, 6'4", really fast guy. He's a state track meet kind of dude, sprinter when he was in high school at Midland Legacy. Really good player. He's developed now after a couple of years, but he just needs to stay healthy. If he can stay healthy, he's going to play a lot and be one of the leading receivers. Another guy they actually did bring in for this offseason from the portal is Andre McCray. He's probably the fastest guy on the team. His numbers are ridiculous. His sprinter numbers, that it's almost like you don't want to list it because people won't believe you. But he comes over from Austin Peay. Some of the assistant coaches a couple of years ago were with him and saw him play at Austin Peay, so they know what they're getting with him. He was here in the spring. He didn't have a monster spring, but it's one of those. We'll see if he actually produces once the season begins, because he has the speed to actually stretch the defense, and that's really what they wanted to do. Wanted to add to the receiver room. They have the size. They have like you said, but a lot of experience coming back. They needed somebody to stretch that defense. They think Dre McCray is that guy.
Can this offensive line be better?
It's going to be better. You mentioned stats. It's got to be better. That was the weakness last year, and that it was from spring, fall camp. That's something that Coach McGuire and I talked about. It seemed like every week, almost every day, and it got a little better towards the end of the year. But adding Cody Spencer, who also was from Western Kentucky, but he was out last year due to injury. He redshirted. He's going to be one of the guards. Dennis Wilburn, who started every game at center, is moving over to guard, which is his natural position. And then Stats, like you mentioned before, is going to be the starting center. That's an improvement on the interior, and they think they're going to get a real push in the run game because of those three guys. The question is that tackle. Monroe Mills, who transferred in from Oklahoma State last year, actually played well at right tackle, better than I thought he was going to. But Caleb Rogers at left tackle just struggled. I mean, there's no way to sugarcoat it. I mean, he got beat at least once or twice a game. And look, Power 5 football, left tackle, you're going to face some amazing athletes just every week, including the Big 12. And so they flipped those guys. Monroe Mills is now, or all spring, he was at left tackle, and Caleb Rogers is at right tackle. And we'll have to see. They face one of Tech's biggest strengths next season, which I'm sure we'll talk about, is their defensive front, their edge rushers. And they got after those tackles a little bit in the spring, especially in the spring game. So we'll have to see how those tackles hold up. But I think overall, and McGuire said the same thing, the offensive line is going to be much improved next year.
And with this offense, they really don't use a tight end on all plays, right? So like both tackles are exposed quite often. So definitely something like they got to get better there for sure. That makes a lot of sense. Defensively, they struggled last year. I mean, most of the opponent adjusted stuff, 75th, 85th, somewhere in that range, which is better than sometimes Texas Tech, like the defenses we grew up with at times, but also not as good as perhaps it could be. And you said something there, Jarret, that kind of intrigued me. You said you think the defensive front and the pass rush could be better, which they lost at a top 10 pick, I think, in Tyree Wilson. Yeah. So, I mean, you lose Tyree Wilson. This is why I really enjoy doing summer school, because I learn a lot from you guys. I had this peg as sort of defensive interior should be improved. A lot of big guys, a lot of depth. What's the pass rush look like from the edge, and how are they going to make up for the loss of Wilson?
Yeah, they have a guy named Miles Cole, 6'6", 285 pounds, who's going to be stepping in there in that, which is very similar to what Tyree Wilson was or is. You can't replace Tyree Wilson. The guy was, a special player. But they did bring in a guy they're really high on. They think he's going to have a possibly an all Big 12 caliber season in Steve Linton out of Syracuse.
From Cuse. Yeah, I'm an ACC guy. Yeah. Dude, he can play. He's good.
Yeah, he looked really good this spring. And Tim DeRuiter, the Tech's defensive coordinator, really, he specializes in producing quality edge rushers. Thibodeau at Oregon a couple years ago, and then Tyree Wilson last year. I mean, he has a proven track record with that. And those two guys, Miles Cole and Steve Linton, are going to be a terror for opposing offenses off the edges, off opposite edges. Linton is more of a, as you said, you're familiar with him. He's more of like a greyhound kind of dude, smaller but very athletic. Guys I really trust who don't embellish within the program told me they think he's the best pure pass rusher they've seen in their career. And they think he's going to have like a double-digit sack kind of season. Miles Cole is very stout against the run, but has shown a great ability as a pass rusher and has improved in his time at Texas Tech. This is his second year after transferring in the previous offseason. Big dude. He looked great. And then on the inside, they have their two stalwarts, Tony Bradford and Jalen Hutchings. And Jalen Hutchings was just here recently, Pro Football Focus ranked him as a top 10 returning interior defensive lineman. And you mentioned the stats with Texas Tech's defense last year, and you're absolutely correct. The overall stats aren't great. But if you look a little deeper, and for us who watch every game and every snap and go to practice and all that, Tech was sneaky good on defense when it mattered. And that was a big reason why they won those final 4 games. They were really good on 3rd and 4th down, and they were really good once teams got in the red zone. They get really aggressive. They start blitzing to protect, points, keep points off the board. And of course, opposing coaches know that's coming from Tim DeRuyter, but he does and the team does such a good job of disguising blitzes that they don't know where it's coming from. So that's been a game changer for Texas Tech in terms of its defense. Overall, teams are going between the 20s, absolutely marching up and down. It's the Big 12. That's part of it. That's the way college football is now. But when it gets to the red zone, when it gets to those big money downs, 3rd and 4th down, at least last year, Texas Tech was unbelievably improved over the previous decade. And they're expecting to be at least as good on defense last year in those areas.
Linebacker, they do lose both Eldridge and Merriweather. What's the concern level? Those guys basically never came off the field and were not amazing players, but they clearly like Tech had to trust them since they basically played nobody else at an inside backer, it seems.
Yeah, they were the 2 leading tacklers, and that was one of my major concerns going into spring. But there were a couple of guys who played. You're right; those 2 guys played almost all the snaps. But in spot duty, there was a couple of guys who came in and played meaningful snaps in big games and actually produced better than I thought. Tyreek Matthews and Jacob Rodriguez, who he actually is from Texas originally, but started off his career at Virginia as a quarterback, transferred to Texas Tech, and has been playing linebacker. And there are high expectations for him. That he looked really well. Not he spring out a lot of the spring, but he looked really good last season when given the opportunity. And the coaches just rave about him. And then they moved a guy I really like, who I think is going to be Tech's leading tackler. They moved Josiah Pierre, who started opposite outside linebacker from Tyree Wilson last year. He's a former player at Florida who transferred in a couple of years ago. He played inside linebacker at Florida and was in the 2 deep behind some future NFL players. And then last year when Tyree went down, even though they played different positions and Wilson missed the last three games, Pierre really came on as an edge rusher, made some big plays, got a big sack against Kansas, which sealed the victory for a very, much improved Kansas team. That was a big win for Texas Tech. He's moved inside. He's about 6'2", 250 and can run. Very good player. Looked great in the spring. He looks the part. He's a kind of first off the bus kind of dude where you're like, whoa, you don't want to mess with that dude. So I'm expecting a big season from Josiah Pierre.
Got to ask you about the secondary here. Like when Tech's defense struggled, it was allowing the explosive play. They were one of the worst in the country at allowing big play passes. They lose some guys in the secondary who were not they weren't amazing. So I'm not really necessarily, do I need to call those guys losses? I mean, they played a lot, so I assume Tech didn't have better guys than them at the time. Do they have better replacements for them now?
Yeah, they had some guys who were injured. Like Tyler Owens is a dude who probably would have started a lot of the games at one of the safety positions, but he was injured all the time. He'd play a game, make like an interception or come up with a big pass breakup, and then he'd get injured and he'd be out for 2 or 3 weeks. And that just kind of kept on happening. He's a former 4-star guy that was originally at Texas who transferred in. He's expected to start next to Dadrian Taylor Demerson, who I think he could be another all Big 12 type player. Very good. He's one in terms of overall football player. He was an all-state record-setting running back in Oklahoma, won multiple state championships in multiple sports, came here, was turned into a safety, and has slowly developed and had a really good career. They need him to be that center fielder, that leader, that guy who can really coordinate things in the secondary. But I really like their corners. They ask a lot. I mentioned a lot of the blitzing and everything, a lot of the blitzing Texas Tech does, and they really ask their corners to man up one-on-one in a lot of situations. And they have two tall, experienced guys who, one was a coach's all Big 12 second team performer, and Malik Dunlap. He's depending on who you ask, he's 6'3" or 6'4". I think he's listed as 6'3". He transferred in from North Carolina State a couple years ago. Had a really good season. I think he was either first or second in pass deflections in the Big 12 last year. But again, they did give up some big plays because they're asked to do so much. Rashad Williams is opposite of him, another 6'3" dude. They are remarkably similar in their style and their abilities. Not, burners, but fast, physical, and aggressive. So it's very feast or famine with them. They get a lot of pass breakups, but they will get victimized by some of these athletes in the Big 12 because of the aggressive way they call their defense.
Makes a lot of sense. They have an interesting schedule here. I find, right? So 6 road games. They're playing at Wyoming. Like, is that a 2-for-1 type thing, or do they owe them a game for taking a coach or something, or what happened there?
No, that is interesting. One of the things is, like, Texas Tech is remodeling. They're getting a new playing surface. They're doing this huge south end zone adjustment or restructure, rebuild on at the Jones at the stadium. There's a lot of projects going on. So they're starting. That's one of the things that I know these are future schedules. These are set a long time ago, but this has all been in the works for a long time. But it is, like, very interesting that they're starting on the road at Wyoming, which is not, that's a bowl team. Tech is going to be favored. They should win, but you got the high elevation. It's a really small stadium. I don't know how many people realize. I didn't know until I was just researching, for the season a couple of months ago, that Wyoming's stadium, I think the capacity is under 30,000, which I didn't know there were Division I schools that had that kind of low capacity. So they're going to be right on top of them. Elevation's over 7,000 feet to start the season. Tech should win that game, but that's a heck of a challenge right out the gate. Considering you have Oregon coming to Lubbock the next week. Right. So it's not like that's just the tough game. That starts off with that weird, that kind of quirky schedule.
I feel like this is a schedule where if you're a top 15 power rated team, you have a really good shot of going 8-4 or better. If you're more in that top 30, top 25 range, then it's sort of somewhere in that 5-7 to 9-3 range. There's a lot more games that become difficult. Going to West Virginia, I think Tech will be favored, right? At Baylor, kind of a toss-up-ish. At BYU, I think Texas a favorite, right? At Kansas, I have Tech favored. At Texas, I have Texas favored. But how good you are, that's kind of a stupid thing for me to say on a show. How good you are is going to depend on how the schedule is. But due to the location of the games, right? A really good team doesn't struggle with this road schedule. A simply just decently good team probably drops a road game or two, and that'll kind of impact their season. I love the home schedule. You get TCU in Lubbock, UCF in Lubbock, Kansas State in Lubbock, Houston in Lubbock. That's a really, if they can manage the early road schedule, having to play at Texas in the final week probably is the game that will decide if you go to the Big 12 title game or not.
I agree 100% on basically everything you said. Your stuff. Yeah, I predicted 9 wins for them. And to give you an idea, people say, oh, he's a homer, it's Texas Tech, but the schedule does set up like that. The roster does show that is a possibility with this schedule. You don't play Oklahoma, you don't play Oklahoma State. Those have been 2 tough games for you historically. Like you said, you have a lot of the 50-50 games. Even Oregon, to me, is a coin toss with maybe Oregon favored a little bit, but one play here or there, and Tech at home in the home opener, I could see them winning that game. ESPN FBI has Tech favored percentage-wise in 9 of the games, with Oregon favored. I think Tech has a 45% chance in that, according to ESPN FPI. That's the last time I checked. So with Texas, being a huge favorite at home in that final game. But no, I think what happens with that Oregon game, that second week, assuming that Tech wins and looks good against Wyoming, but how that game plays out, I think is what the national perception is going to be.
Sure.
I mean, I just think that most national writers are going to take that and be like, okay, this is whether it's fair or not, it's going to be a national broadcast and all that. And then after that, like you said, West Virginia, Tech's done very well, fared well against them the last couple of years. Houston, same thing, beat them last year, even though it was an overtime game. And Donovan Smith, the former Tech quarterback, is there, so that'll be interesting.
And Tyler Shuck gets revenge against Oregon. Like, you got a lot of revenge quarterback games on the schedule. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, there are a bunch of storylines. The game with Baylor, Baylor really took it to Tech last year, and of course Joey McGuire and a lot of the staff came over from Baylor. So there's he told me, like, there's one game I really want to do over. It's that Baylor game last year. So there are so many stories. It's going to be a lot of fun. There's so many storylines for Tech this season. But I do think, and this could be the final game between Tech and Texas for the foreseeable future. There have been talks about them having an agreement after Texas goes to the SEC. But I don't buy it. I'll believe it when I see it with this kind of thing. I think it could be the last game. Tech beat Texas last year in overtime. It's a very dramatic game. Tech has actually won 2 of the last 4 games played in Austin, which is very unusual. UT has just dominated the series overall, but especially in Austin. So if Tech was able to win that game, somehow, like you said, maybe get to the Big 12 championship, beat Texas in Austin, and kind of wrap that series up in that fashion, would mean a whole lot to the fan base out here in Lubbock and Texas Tech in general.
All right, we try to stay mostly positive on this show. Yeah. How does this thing go off the rails? Like, where are the spots where, all right, we like the starters at practice, we see it, the backups, not that they suck, not that they won't be able to play eventually, but like, if they got to play now, we think there's a big drop off. We think there's problems if the backups got to play at these spots.
Yeah, they're thin at corner. They have veteran guys who multi-year starters, but they have young, talented guys, but they're young at corner. If they have 1 or 2 serious injuries at corner, that could spell huge trouble. All of a sudden, a lot of the scheme doesn't work. You try and play that aggressive style. You can't leave these young corners against some of these athletes you're going to face in your schedule. These freak receivers you're going to face. You will get torched. It'll look like the old Texas Tech, which is, you got to score almost every possession to win. That is a major concern for me. I like their kickers, but they're replacing the kicker again. You never know. That could cost you a game or 2. They did look good in the spring, but it's different once, the lights are actually on. They're on TV. They're unproven guys. The tackles. I got to go back to the tackles. Yeah. If they get Tyler Shuck injured, there's a reason why they played 3 quarterbacks last year, and it wasn't because these guys are soft. It was because they were taking a lot of big hits because the tackles and the offensive line struggled. I do expect the offensive line to be better overall, but it's concerning to me. I don't like to call out a single guy, but this is big boy football. It's concerning to me that Caleb Rogers is still considered a starter after the season he had. So behind him are unproven guys that they feel shouldn't start ahead of him and Monroe Mills. So, a couple of injuries on the offensive line, and it could get scary there too for the quarterbacks in the offense.
Jarret Johnson, Inside the Red Raiders, man. Really appreciate the time.
Hey, thanks for having me.